Many people think Deltarune is a simple linear story, and many people expect there to be only two main locations, Hometown and the Dark World. I'm here to propose an analysis, a theory, and an idea that changes how everyone will view Deltarune entirely. What if Obama was the final boss of Deltarune? Would Obama have the freedom motive? The first thing we can see that supports this theory is the subtle hints of the year in Deltarune. Spamton is the most notorious example of this, with his famous catchphrase, #1 rated salesman 1997, which shows that Deltarune has to exist after this year, because Spamton used to be a big shot. This is referenced in the Spamton Neo fight, where he mentions he will be making a comeback special. So we can assume that Deltarune takes place around the late 2000s, which would be enough time for Spamton to consider himself falling out of popularity. Keeping this in mind, we can assume that Deltarune takes place around Obama's time as president. Another thing that helps back this up is Queen and her greatest betrayal in Chapter 2, which is admitting she only plays mobile games. The main reason this raises an eyebrow is because Queen herself is a computer, so she would technically have access to almost every PC game available, but she chooses to play mobile games for some reason. While this seems a bit peculiar, we need to take into account what was popular at the time: mobile games. The reason we know this was popular is because Queen herself wants to play them instead of her native games. As an example, this is like being given every game in the world and deciding to play Fruit Ninja. While the game itself is a staple of early gaming, it's not on my Steam wishlist. Using the knowledge of Queen being a mobile gamer, we can infer that Deltarune takes place in the year 2008, because this is the time mobile games were at their largest. This is mainly thanks to the App Store becoming more widely available. Now that we determine that the year is 2008, we can infer that Obama would be in office because this was the start to his presidency. Now that we know the date, we need to know the location. And to start this off, we can already figure out both Undertale and Deltarune take place on Earth. This is because of the song, "But the Earth Refused to Die," and the prophecy, which states, "Earth draws her final breath." So with this, we know that Chris and Susie have to be on one of the 7 continents, but where at exactly? We can look at the currency, which is dollars, but that honestly doesn't give us as much of a clue as our next piece of evidence, Susie's speaking pattern. According to this really neat Reddit article that is very convenient, I learned that Susie calls fountains water bubblers. Using this map, we can see which places in America citizens refer to fountains as water bubblers, leading us to this specific state, Wisconsin. Another quick thing we should look at is Hometown's layout, which honestly doesn't say much, at least until you look east and see a huge lake. Using this knowledge, we know that a lake has to be nearby, or an ocean, which leads to my personal theory, and what we will assume for the rest of this analysis, is that Deltarune takes place right next to Lake Poygan in Wisconsin. I probably butchered that, so now that we know Deltarune takes place in Obama's term, we can figure out how this would affect the story. For starters, would the government know about Dark Worlds? I would say yes, they probably have knowledge of their existence, but don't know how to actually conjure them. The main reason I believe the government would know about the Dark Worlds is because of the prophecy Rousey shares with us, in which he shares the knowledge that Lightners and Darkners once lived in harmony. I think it's safe to assume at least someone other than Rousey would have kept knowledge of this period of time. Now you may be asking, how does this change any of Deltarune? And that's where I blow your socks off by saying, I think the final boss of Deltarune could be Obama himself. The main reason I think that is because Chris and Susie are still in school. A huge thing that a lot of high schools do in the US is tour the White House. This means we could see Alphys and Toriel take them on a class-filled trip, and once they make it to the White House, they would enter a dark fountain. I believe the Dark Fountain would be made up of enemies that bear resemblance to the American flag, paperwork, and maybe even bald eagles. We could also see the fountain turn the White House into a menacing maze of walls with the portraits of the founding fathers. And for the boss fight, I believe Obama himself would fight Chris, Susie, and Rousey. But not only that, I believe that he would have the freedom motive. This is backed up by many theories of how the freedom motive works. That being that the boss that has the motive has to be related to freedom in some way. For instance, Jevil thinks he has freedom. Spamton yearns for his freedom. The Knight missing freedom. And Gerson having achieved freedom in his life. Using this knowledge, we can connect Obama to America, the land of the free, or land of freedom. We could see Obama fighting to keep freedom in America and potentially misunderstanding why Chris, Susie, and Rouse are attempting to close the fountain, which he could see as the ultimate form of freedom. Using all this info, I believe entirely that Obama would have the freedom motive, and that his boss theme would be called the American Dream, which represents the freedom to do anything. Overall, I believe we have found the truth. Sands is a government spy, and that is why he is sleeping with our mom. Wrong analysis. In conclusion, that's why I believe that Deltarune could potentially explore outside of hometown and eventually find its way to Obama, who indeed does deserve the freedom motive. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.